I have been working in internal audit almost 30 years across different sectors in many countries. And honestly, one of the most interesting things I still see today is this. In many companies, business continuity management is still not treated as a fully independent discipline. So, in fact, especially in Turkey or near countries, in many organizations, there is not even a separate BCM department. The topic is usually pushed under IT. So people think BCM means backups, servers, recovery systems, those type of things, you know? So of course technology is important. Yeah, and I don't ignore those type of things, but a company doesn't stop operating only because of a server fails. Sometimes operations stop because one supplier disappears, like Bushra says, or one port closes, or one experienced employee resigns, or one Excel file suddenly becomes the most critical system in the company. Or usually nobody realizes this, but until that person goes on vacation, you know, with an Excel file on his computer. So coming to your question, what is the first sign internal audit and BCM are not really talking to each other? For me, the answer is usually very simple. BCM talks about scenarios, internal audit talks about controls, but nobody talks enough about operational dependencies. So this is where the gap starts, in my opinion. BCM teams often prepare theoretical recovery plans. Internal audit teams, on the other hand, test governance structures and control mechanisms, like every internal audit does that. But many times, neither side fully analyzes the business truly depends on to continue operating during a crisis. For example, do we depend on one supplier, or do we depend on one country? Do we have alternative logistic routes? Can production continue manually if systems fail? Are there key processes, for example, depending on only one person? So these are very operational questions. So, and honestly, these are the questions that create the biggest surprises during a real crisis. So let me give you a small example for procurement. Internal auditors often review approvals, segregation of duties, purchase orders, or vendor onboarding, those type of things, classical internal controls. But sometimes the more important question is, what happens if this supplier disappears tomorrow morning? So and very often, companies do not have a clear answer to that question. So, because many organizations still see BCM investments as an extra cost. People think, why should we spend money for something that never happened or may never happen, you know? So human nature is optimistic. We like to believe if it didn't happen yesterday, probably it won't happen tomorrow. Unfortunately, the world recently gave us many examples showing this is not true. Regional tensions in the Gulf, for example, everybody knows that, affected logistic routes and transit times. The pandemic, like a couple of years ago, affected global supply chains. Everything collapsed. And in Turkey, we all know earthquakes are not theoretical risks; they are real risks. But despite this reality, in many organizations, BCM plans are still not mature enough. Sometimes data backups exist, but nobody tested them, whether systems can actually recover quickly, like Bushra said. Alternative office locations, for example, they exist on paper, but employees do not even know where they are. Manual fallback procedures exist, but nobody practiced them. So crisis committees also exist, but during a real crisis, people suddenly discover that nobody knows who should make decisions. So this is where internal audit can create huge value, in my opinion, because auditors are naturally trained to ask uncomfortable questions. We are professionally very curious people, and sometimes maybe too curious. That is why the business units become nervous when internal audit enters to the meeting room.